Molly Cecilia Tibbetts, a dynamic and ambitious 20-year-old student, lived in a peaceful small town in Iowa, where people always felt safe. However, in the final 15 minutes of her daily run, everything changed. She vanished on the familiar path she ran on every day. No one knew where Molly had gone or who had taken her. The cause of the incident lay within that small town. Amidst seemingly tranquil cornfields, this was not just a simple disappearance. It was the story of a lurking predator, a community living in fear, and a 34-day manhunt. An investigation that would change Iowa's crime history. What the investigators ultimately uncovered was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Molly Cecilia Tibbetts was born on May 8, 1998, in San Francisco, California. Her parents, Rob Tibbetts and Laura, divorced when she was young, and she grew up alternating between the West Coast and the Midwest. She primarily lived in Iowa with her mother and two brothers, Jake and Scott, but maintained a strong, close relationship with her father in California, despite the distance. Molly was described as a cheerful and vibrant person. She had a warm, friendly personality and always showed compassion. Whether she was with classmates, co-workers, or children at the summer camp where she worked, she made everyone feel valued and recognized. Academically, Molly excelled in writing and speech, earning invitations to perform at the Iowa All-State competition for 3 consecutive years, a testament to her skill and dedication. She has a passion for theater and acting, always seeking opportunities to express her creativity. What truly distinguished Molly was her heartfelt love for children. She began babysitting at a young age and gained years of experience by the time she entered college. Each summer, she worked at the GRMC day camp, where children adored her. Molly dreamed of a career in psychology, specializing in child and adolescent mental health. At that time, she was a sophomore at the University of Iowa. Her family and friends believed she had the potential to become an exceptional psychologist who could truly change lives. Running was also a significant part of Molly's life. She participated in cross-country during high school, which taught her discipline and endurance. As she grew older, running evolved into a daily ritual and a way for her to unwind and reflect. Friends often saw her joyful running videos on social media, showcasing her infectious energy and love for life. Molly had a long-standing and committed relationship with her boyfriend, Dalton Jack. Their relationship exemplified love and mutual respect, inspiring their friends. Molly was a person the world needs more of. Kind, driven, funny, and full of potential. She had ambitious plans and dreams for her future. However, on July 18, 2018, everything changed when her life was abruptly taken. In the summer of 2018, Molly stayed at her brother Dalton's Brooklyn house. It was a normal arrangement. Dalton was working, and his brother and his fiancée were away, leaving Molly to look after the house and the dog. She had done this before, and it was just another quiet summer week in a small Iowa town. On the evening of July 18th, Molly followed her usual routine. Throughout the day, she exchanged texts and Snapchats with Dalton, making plans and checking in as couples do when apart. Everything seemed normal. Around 7:30 p.m., as the summer heat subsided and the sun was about to set, Molly put on her running shoes and went for her usual run in Brooklyn. Security cameras in the neighborhood captured her, a young woman in running clothes, wearing headphones, moving gracefully through the quiet streets. She looked relaxed, focused on her run, enjoying music or a podcast. There was no sign that she felt any danger. This blurry image would be the last memory of her alive. But around 7:45 p.m., something unusual happened. Molly's phone data showed her speed increasing rapidly, almost reaching car speed, something impossible for a pedestrian. The last signal from her phone came from South Brooklyn, near a small community called Guernsey. Before disappearing completely, Molly never returned home, and she didn't show up for her summer camp the following day, causing her family and friends great anxiety. On July 19, 2018, her family reported her missing, and the search began. This led to one of the largest missing person searches in Iowa's history. Hundreds of volunteers from Brooklyn and nearby towns formed search parties, combing fields, forests, ditches, and abandoned buildings. Horse riding teams searched areas inaccessible to vehicles. Local businesses displayed missing person flyers, while churches held prayer vigils. The entire community seemed to hold its breath. The FBI joined the investigation, providing resources a small police department couldn't have. In the following weeks, investigators conducted more than 500 interviews and received over 2,300 tips. They analyzed data from Molly's Fitbit and examined her phone records, mapping her movements in detail. The case quickly gained national attention, with Molly's image appearing on news programs across the country. Social media campaigns spread her story, using the hashtag #FindMolly as people from all over America shared her plight and hoped for her safe return. Her family made emotional pleas on camera for anyone with information to come forward. However, as time went on, hope faded as there was no concrete information about Molly. No ransom demand. No sign that she was alive. The focus of the investigation shifted from a rescue operation to a more somber homicide investigation, searching for answers about what happened to a young woman who had simply gone for a run and never returned. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source: home security footage from the neighborhood where Molly was running that night. On August 15th, nearly a month after Molly's disappearance, investigators carefully reviewed the video from cameras in the area where she was last seen. What they discovered was chilling. The footage showed a figure resembling a runner moving through the streets, consistent with Molly's known route and timing, the evening she vanished. More importantly, the video also shows a black Chevrolet Malibu constantly moving around the area. Over approximately 20 minutes of footage, the same vehicle passed through the neighborhood 6 times. This was no coincidence. This wasn't someone lost or looking for parking. Someone had been watching Molly as she ran, tracking her movements and waiting for the right moment to act. The perpetrator was captured on camera, and investigators found a specific vehicle among hundreds of black sedans they needed to identify. With this new information, law enforcement began looking for a distinctive Malibu. It wasn't long before a deputy saw a car matching the description and approached the driver, a 24-year-old man named Christian Bahena Rivera. Christian was from El Guayabillo, a small rural town in Guerrero, Mexico. He moved to the United States at about 17 years old, crossing the border and eventually settling in Iowa, where he found work. For years, he lived largely unnoticed in an agricultural community that depended on seasonal labor. He worked at Yarrabee Farms, a dairy operation near Brooklyn, under the alias John Bood, and received wages without proper verification of his immigration status. His employers later claimed they had no idea he was undocumented. He simply appeared, did his job, and left. Most people described him as an ordinary, unremarkable person. When investigators confronted Christian about the black Chevrolet Malibu seen circling Molly's neighborhood, he initially denied knowing anything about Molly or her disappearance. He insisted he had no involvement and was merely a farm worker focused on his routine. However, as questioning continued, inconsistencies began to surface in his story. Investigators remained patient but firm, confident in what the footage had shown and that his car had been present. When forensic technicians examined the Chevrolet Malibu, they discovered incriminating evidence against Christian. In the trunk, investigators found traces of blood. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Molly. The car had been driving around her neighborhood the night she died and contained physical evidence related to her death. Christian's denials were increasingly exposed. Under increasing pressure from investigators and the emerging evidence, Christian's story changed significantly. He admitted to seeing Molly running that night and claimed he drove alongside her, attempting to engage her in conversation. He stated that when she threatened to call the police, he became furious. He said he blacked out during the incident and couldn't recall the attack's specifics, but later remembered driving and noticing Molly's earbuds in his car, earbuds that shouldn't have been there. To his horror, he realized she was in the trunk of his vehicle. He then drove to a secluded cornfield in rural Poweshiek County, brought her body into the field, and covered it with corn stalks to conceal his crime. In a crucial turning point in the case, Christian led investigators to the very spot where he had disposed of Molly's body. He guided them to the field and identified where he had hidden her among the corn. After 34 agonizing days of searching, the worst fears were confirmed. Molly Cecilia Tibbetts had been killed. On August 21, 2018, the girl's body was found in a cornfield, hidden among tall trees. Her running shorts and underwear were discovered several dozen feet from her remains, indicating the terrible circumstances of her final moments. The Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office conducted a thorough autopsy and confirmed what everyone feared. Molly had been brutally murdered. The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds, with the medical examiner identifying between 9 and 12 separate injuries to her head, neck, abdomen, and hands. The wounds on her hands told a heartbreaking story of their own as defensive wounds, injuries suffered while trying to protect herself against an attacker, raising her hands to block the knife, fighting against someone trying to kill her. Unfortunately, after more than a month in the hot Iowa summer, Molly's body was severely decomposed. Molly, a 20-year-old psychology student with dreams of helping children, was brutally murdered while jogging. Christian Bahena Rivera was arrested on August 22, 2018, and charged with first-degree murder, the day after Molly's body was discovered in a cornfield. Due to the serious nature of the crime and the risk of him fleeing the country, bail was set at $5 million, an amount he couldn't pay. He pleaded not guilty and remained in custody while awaiting trial. The case was postponed several times in the subsequent years due to petitions and appeals from the defense attorney aimed at challenging the evidence and excluding the confession. It took nearly 3 years before Christian finally faced a jury. The trial took place in Scott County, Iowa. During the court proceedings, Christian's defense team presented a completely different version of events from his initial police statement. Christian claimed that 2 masked men forced him to drive the car on the night Molly disappeared, threatening to harm his girlfriend and child if he told the truth. In this new testimony, Christian portrayed himself as a victim, forced to dispose of the body, not a murderer. However, the prosecution and the jury found this hard to believe. They pointed to strong forensic evidence, including Molly's DNA and blood found in his car trunk, surveillance footage showing his vehicle circling her neighborhood 6 times while she jogged, and his earlier confession, where he admitted to confronting Molly, losing control when she threatened to call the police, and blacking out during the attack. Continuous changes in his testimony and the forgetting of important details indicate that he is aware of his guilt rather than being innocent. On May 28, 2021, after weeks of testimony from various experts and witnesses, the jury reached their verdict. Christian Bahena Rivera was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury's deliberations lasted several hours, but they unanimously agreed that he was guilty. On August 30, 2021, the judge sentenced Christian to life imprisonment without parole. Under Iowa law, he will not have the chance for reconsideration or to be released early. Christian was transferred to Iowa State Prison, where he remains incarcerated without a specific release date and will spend the rest of his life in prison. After the conviction, Christian's defense team filed appeals in an attempt to overturn the verdict. They also accused another prisoner who confessed to a fellow inmate that he was the actual murderer and had framed Christian. The courts carefully examined these claims and found them entirely inconsistent with the physical evidence in the case. On October 11, 2023, the Iowa Court of Appeals upheld the first-degree murder conviction, dismissing all defense arguments. Justice, in a legal sense, had been served. In the wake of this tragedy, Molly's family made a significant decision. Instead of drowning in sorrow and remaining in the darkness, they decided to transform their pain into positive action, to honor Molly's memory and continue the mission she once wished to carry out. They created the Molly Tibbetts Memorial Fund for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital. This fund supports mental health services for children and teenagers, the very group Molly aspired to assist in her psychology career. Every dollar raised contributes to helping young people facing mental health challenges, providing them with the support that Molly would have offered had she completed her education and entered the field. Fundraising efforts in her honor have continued every year. In 2021, an event called Wave Across Iowa raised over $18,000 for the Memorial Fund. Her old high school has also established the Molly Tibbetts Memorial Scholarship Fund, named Brooklyn Strong. This fund has awarded scholarships several times to students intending to pursue careers that help children. Future teachers, counselors, psychologists, and social workers will continue the mission that Molly never had the opportunity to complete. Local memorial runs allowed participants to complete routes Molly never finished, honoring her memory with each step. The running community has embraced Molly's story with profound reverence. Female runners, in particular, connected with Molly's case, reflecting on the risks women face even during simple activities like jogging. Safety tips were exchanged, running groups formed, and participants began to look out for each other more closely. Throughout this period, Molly's family consistently requested dignity and restraint in discussions surrounding her death. When some attempted to politicize the case based on the killer's immigration status, her family firmly opposed this. They wanted Molly remembered for who she truly was, a vibrant young woman full of love, laughter, and promise. The murder of Molly Tibbetts disrupted the tranquility of a small Iowa town, reminding the nation that evil can exist anywhere, even in seemingly safe communities. A young girl, with her whole future ahead of her, was brutally robbed of her life simply because she inadvertently encountered a predator. Her killer is imprisoned for life, a sentence that will last until his death. Yet, no punishment can bring Molly back, nor can it erase the suffering her family has experienced. They will never witness her college graduation or her realization of becoming a psychologist, as all those dreams were shattered one summer evening in July. What endures is her legacy scholarships established in her name, mental health services funded in her honor, miles run to remember her, and the many who cherish her kindness. laughter, and dreams unfulfilled. If there is any solace in this tragedy, it is this: Molly Tibbetts will not be forgotten. Her life mattered, her death mattered, and through the efforts carried out in her name, a part of her vision to help children and improve the world lives on. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus. But as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies. a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the two police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years, until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Arliss Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, It was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. Roberta Agiassi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio Di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together, their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother, as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice, appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19, Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m., but when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3 8-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. but mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Tuckeria, Texas. At the time, Angi was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angi is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angi longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angi and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angi's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angi's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angi after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angi hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angi and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angi, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's Meat Market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angi kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angi seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, Though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship, Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angi likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angi and Jared's marriage. While Angi had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angi's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angi later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angi seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angi's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angi and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angi, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11th, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angi's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angi lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angi's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angi's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angi. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angi's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angi. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angi in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angi. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angi had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angi had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angi's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angi's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angi's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angi. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angi's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angi's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angi's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angi's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angi. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angi's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angi's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angi's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angi's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angi's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angi's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angi back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angi's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angi's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angi's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angi before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angi remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angi's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angi's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old McKenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebbett Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at McKenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. McKenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. McKenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. McKenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebit Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting McKenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from McKenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. McKenzie's friends later revealed McKenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to McKenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. McKenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield. But beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. McKenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire. A woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. McKenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, McKenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near McKenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting McKenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that McKenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over McKenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that McKenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through McKenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. McKenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between McKenzie and Thompson showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to McKenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored McKenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "McKenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." McKenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how McKenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son, but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at McKenzie's apartment that night, despite the AVO, but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that McKenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her, though his story shifted under scrutiny with inconsistencies about the sequence of events. He denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, McKenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to McKenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed McKenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of McKenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence, knife fragments bearing McKenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of McKenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of McKenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025 in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackert. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy, The appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of two brothers. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant. In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation, and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, in August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of 2, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of 2 muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignataro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance, and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence.